Hola! Welcome back to another Spanish lesson with Senor Geis. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how to conjugate stem-changing verbs. And I'm going to tell you what a stem-changing verb is in the first place. So what is a stem-changing verb? Stem-changing verb is a verb that changes its stem. And you need to know what the stem of a verb is. The stem of a verb is the part of the verb without the ending, without the AR, ER, or IR ending. So poder means can, or to be able to. So the stem of poder is pod, because you take off the ER, which is the ending, and then you just have pod, which is the stem. Jugar means to play. Take off the AR, and you've got jug as the stem. Preferir means to prefer, and if you take off the IR ending, then prefer is your stem of the verb. So stem-changing verbs, you change the stem, and when you change the stem, you change the last vowel in the stem. You should remember that a vowel is A, E, I, or U. So you're going to change A, E, I, O, U, the last one of those, in the stem. So dormir means to sleep. The stem is dorm. You take off the IR, and then we're going to change the last vowel, which in this case there's only one vowel, O, so we're going to change the O. Entender means to understand. We're going to find the stem, which is entend, and then we're going to find the last vowel. So there's two E's in entend, but we're going to choose the one that's last, the one that is closest to the right. So in this case, it's the second E, entend, and we're going to change that second E. Encontrar means to find. So we're going to find the stem, which is encontr, and then find the last vowel, which is the O, the one that is closest to the right. So we're going to change the O in encontrar. So there are four different kinds of stem changes in Spanish, and you have to know if a verb is a stem-changing verb or not. Not all verbs are stem-changing verbs. You have to memorize if a verb is a stem-changing verb and what kind of stem-changing verb it is. So the first kind is O, changes to UE. So some of the most common O to UE verbs are poder, which means can, dormir, which means to sleep, and costar, which means to cost. So in all three of these verbs, you're going to change the O to a UE as the stem change. Second kind of stem change, you can change a U to a UE also. There's only one of these kinds of verbs in Spanish, and that is jugar, which means to play. You can change an E to an IE, and verbs that do this are verbs like querer, which means to want, preferir, which means to prefer, and entender, which means to understand. All three of these verbs will change the E to an IE. And then finally, you can change an E also to an I. Some verbs that change an E to an I are pedir, which means to order or ask for, servir, which means to serve, and seguir, which means to follow. You might notice that there's two different options if you have an E as the last vowel. That is something you're going to have to memorize based on the word. So querer changes to IE, but pedir changes to just I. So you're going to have to memorize how the stem change works with each word that you learn. You also notice probably that there's no A's or I's here. There are not really any stem changing verbs that use an A, that change an A or change an I. So how do you know when to change the stem? Well, there's a certain pattern. You don't always change the stem when you're conjugating a verb in the present tense. You are going to change it in the singular first, second, and third person. So that's yo, tú, él, ella, usted. But you're not going to change it for nosotros, and you're not going to change it for vosotros, first and second person plural. But you will change it for third person plural. This might be a little confusing, but there is a term that people have come up with to help you remember this, and that is boot verbs. So stem-changing verbs are the same thing as boot verbs, and you can remember it because you change the stem in the shape of a boot. So the first, second, and third person singular, and then also the third person plural, kind of makes the shape of a boot. when you conjugate it in a chart like this. So let's go through some examples. Dormir means to sleep. We're going to find the stem, which is dorm, and we're going to pick out the last vowel, do, the O, do, in dormir. Then we're going to change that O to UE. So we've got duerma, right? So now we can conjugate it in our box, right? So we can have duermo. We're going to use the regular present tense endings here. Dormir is an IR verb, so when we can say dormir, we can say duermo, and then second person singular will say duermes, right? The ES ending goes with an IR verb. Duerme, he or she sleeps, and duermen, they sleep. So we've filled in the boot now. Now, to do the other two, we will just conjugate it normally. You don't have to do the stem change, so you change it back to dorm, and then you can conjugate dormimos and dormis. Jugar is our only U to UE verb, and it means to play. So when we conjugate it, we're going to find the stem and pick out the last vowel, which is the U. And then we can change that U to UE. So we've got jueg, and we can conjugate it juego, juegas, juega. Notice we're using the AR endings here because jugar is an AR verb, and juegan in the boot shape. Now to do the nosotros and vosotros forms, we're going to change it back to jug and say jugamos and jugáis. Preferir means to prefer, and this is an E to IE verb. So to conjugate it, we're going to find the stem, find that last E, and change it to IE. Prefier, and we can conjugate it prefiero, prefieres, prefiere, prefieren. Again, using the E endings because it's an IE, an IR verb. And then doing the nosotros and vosotros forms, we change it back to prefer and say preferimos and preferis. Finally, we've got our E to I verbs like servir, which means to serve. So we're going to find our stem, find the last vowel, which is the E, and we will change that E to an I because it's an E to I stem changer, and we can start conjugating. Servir is an IR verb, so we're going to use our IR endings. So sirvo, sirves, sirve, sirven. And then to do nosotros and vosotros, change it back to normal and say servimos and servis. So stem changing verbs, there's a lot of stuff you need to remember with these, so make sure you get a lot of practice. Make sure you know which vowel you're going to change when you change the stem, and then also remember that you only are going to change that stem in the boot shape, and then you also have to remember which vowel changes to what. So if it's an O, if it changes to UE, if it's a U, it changes to UE, and then you also have to remember if it's an E, does it change to an IE or does it change to an I? That's something you're going to have to remember. So make sure you get a lot of practice with this.